As America braces itself for a new political term, and as we enter into the evolution of a political movement, one that is attributed to the recent victory attained by President Donald Trump, now the 47th President of the United States. But what does all that mean for transgenders in women's sports? We often hear three terms often used to explain and or define the importance and or significance of diversity in women's sports. They include inclusivity, fairness, and discrimination. So let's tackle them. Wherein you have two groups who view transgender and women's sports differently, you ultimately end up with what has happened now, an entire new era that will be controlled both the Senate and the House by very conservative views. The liberal view is that if you are a man who's had surgery to make you a woman and or have taken hormones, you can identify as a quote-unquote woman and therefore participate in women's sports. But the same argument has not come about when discussing the role of women having surgery to become a man and participate in men's sport. That being said, throughout the last 4 years, we've heard over and over again the importance and significance of inclusivity as it pertains to allowing men who've had surgery and or hormone treatment to participate in women's sports and present themselves as women. The argument or the debate has been that arguably, wherein they are born men, despite hormone treatment and surgery, they are still gifted, if you will, with the physiology of men. And therefore, they ultimately have a strength that women do not have. What might this new political climate create in terms of shifting the conversation and the outcome? During President Obama's 8 years in the White House, there was a push for same-sex marriage and LGBTQIA standards, a push for partnership agreements and civil agreements. By the time Trump got in office, some of those things were being repealed and or amended. But then the next 4 years under the Biden-Harris, we saw these same issues revisited, not just simply in sports, but even in how transgenders are perceived in K through 12 curriculums, their matriculation in school, co-ed bathrooms, and or actually allowing these boys to enter into all-girls bathrooms. We have seen the same in certain detention and incarceration facilities where transgenders are housed with girls and or female inmates. And we've also noticed where some of these female inmates have gotten pregnant. So, under this new administration and this era of change, what is going to happen to women's sports? There has been this conversation about salary. There's been a conversation about sponsorship and branding and marketing, media rights, merchandising. Will women's sports survive the next 4 years? Let us look at what happened in the Olympics. In the 1996 Olympics, the Rebecca Lobos, Cheryl Swoops, Lisa Leslie, Dawn Stately, and the like were literally the catalysts to the envision of a WNBA. And under liberalism, they prevailed until political parties changed. And then we saw a decrease in viewership and an increase in the way people looked at women's sports, particularly as it pertains to women identifying in same-sex relationships. Are we headed in the same direction now? I've made very clear I am heterosexual, straight. Well, what does straight mean? It means I don't do anything with women. The only studs around me are the diamonds in my ear. Period. No disrespect. But I also recognize that the LGBTQIA community in this space are very prominent and dominant. I also recognize that they simply want to live their lives accordingly, and in that process, participate in sports. But wherein the conversation shifts to not simply girls in same-sex relationships or identifying themselves as the male partner or the stud, if you will, but actually being a man or a boy, born male, who has subjected himself to surgery and or hormone replacement with the effort of being able to identify as a girl. That is problematic in the space of sports. There is a reason why Title IX exists. There's a reason why there's girls and boys, male and female, women and men sports. It was specifically allowed equal playing field for both sides. I have the same concerns when women try to say we're going to play football. No, you're not. Start a women's football league. Leave the NFL alone. There's a reason why these are gender specific. If there were nothing, that is one thing. But women could create their own background, their own environments for football, be it U.S. soccer and or U.S. football. But you don't have to find your way trying to take over the men's sport, in as much as we don't want transgenders taking over women's sports. So we talked about those three terms of inclusivity, discrimination, and fairness. We recognize the need to be inclusive, to be engaging, to be inviting. But that should not be at the expense of us not recognizing some of the side or the adverse effects or impact that allowing transgenders to enter into the sport would have. And I've pretty much reiterated some of them. They will dominate the sport. They present as men, although they appear as women. It will be not advantageous to women, and it would not be fair. There's that fairness for women to literally be competing against other men in what we define as a women's sport. There is not the same between same-sex females and transgenders. And I think that is ultimately why this conversation has found itself in the middle of women's sports, because they're looking at the fact that, well, you have these girls who are lesbian, but that is exactly who they are. Not all, but some. So wherein they're identifying as lesbian and gay and or in same-sex relationships, be it your Candace Parker, Witherspoon, Taurasi, to name a few, those women are still women. They were born female, not male. So you do not equate them to being transgender. They do not possess the physiology of men. Born women. It would be unfair to allow women to have to compete against men. Now, I know in the NBA All-Star Week 24, you had Sabrina I competing in a three-point game against Stephen Curry. Curry won. But she also had benefits notwithstanding her loss. She was even given WNBA regulation in terms of the basketball. So even in that, there was a fairness to balance her competing against a male in a men's sport, basketball, and her representing the WNBA for women. But wherein you put men who've had surgery and or hormone treatments in the same stead, the outcome is going to be different. So, what is going to happen under this Trump administration to transgenders in women's sports? I foresee a dominant Congress that is now Republican dominant, dominated by Republicans, Republican-controlled Senate and the House. I see them pushing for legislation to protect women's sports. And I see that trickling down on state levels. I see a repeal and or abolishing of previous laws that were intended to provide what they call as inclusiveness. But it again is so interesting. Its inclusivity seemingly only found its way into women's sports, not the NFL, not men's soccer, not Major League Baseball and or hockey. So we still must protect the brand of women's sports. And let us not be confused that for those who identify as coming out of the culture, the LGBT community, those ladies are not men, as it were. And they do not need to be competing against men. And for those who are in these spaces who are heterosexual, it would be unfair for them to have to endure competing against men. So what do? The suggestion is easy. And as much as we have men and women's sports, transgenders can create leagues of their own that could be supported within their communities and others as well. So wherein I asked the question, what do we think is going to happen to transgenders and women's in sports under Trump administration? I simply think the conversation is going to end like this. There will not be an avenue for transgenders to participate in women's sports. And I don't believe that that is a sign of discrimination, nor do I believe that that is a sign of disparity. There's an option for them. Sports are gender specific, men's sports and women's sports. If there's a hybrid, they can fall under transgenders and therefore get the funding that other sports equally are trying to attain and that women have tried to attain under Title IX. So the protections would be there for them too. Thank you for joining me today on Field to Rim. This is Lisa Hampton. Love is selflessly authentic, having all money, power, talent, opportunities now. I think some of you by now know that we have the Ron Ball, The Allen Iverson Way, upcoming 10-part docuseries. It is on a YouTube channel and on the website. YouTube is Field to Rim Podcast. Check it out. This would be the first promo trailer, but not the official trailer. I'm grateful for the emails that I have, but I equally would encourage you to leave your comments on the website. I'm okay with that too. Thank you. I'm grateful for the constructive criticism that we've received, but I'm also grateful for those who have applauded what it is we're attempting to do. I can assure you when this is over, not only will it tap into the fan base that he has, but it will create a new fan base. Not only are we reaching Generation XY, but we've also found a way to tap into Z. It is interesting that Donald Trump's speech said this was a quote-unquote political movement. It almost sounds like some of the word and the lingo and the verbiage used in Ron Ball, Allen Iverson Way, which takes Allen Iverson's life through the social movements that include 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, everything you can think of, including but not limited to the political movement, cultural, religion. And so it's interesting that the 47th President of the United States used similar terms. Think about that. And I didn't write his speech. All right, thank you. Don't be alarmed if you see a new trailer. You know, over the last couple of weeks, we've been posting different trailers, getting different views, targeting different audiences. But subscribe and or like or leave a comment. And do the same with us on the YouTube channel. We're still on Spotify, Apple, and the other podcasts. But we're trying to build a growing community organically on YouTube. Thank you so much. Have a blessed one.